So one of the things that is a misconception with breaching, if I teach you how to build a quote unquote, we call it delivery hose, but fire hose charge or duct tape linear, that makes me a breacher. Well, sorry to bust your bubble, but it really does not make you a breacher. That makes you a charge slapper.
This is Beer 30, a podcast that connects badass people and shares their experiences over a cold one. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. And if you like it, don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Let's get started with today's episode.
Welcome to another episode of Beer 30. I am your host, Tanner Denton, and today we have Shane Foster with Guild Solutions. Shane, thank you so much for coming onto the show finally.
Appreciate you, bro. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about it for a little bit and finally got you on. We had a little bit of weather there, and then SHOT Show came around, and obviously UF Pro was there and you were there, and everyone was busy as all get outs, but we finally got together. So it's great to have you here. But for those people that don't know who you are, do you mind going through and explain what you've done and what you currently do today?
Yeah, man. So got bit by the bug years ago, right after 9/11, got into law enforcement, kind of stayed in that vein a little bit, did go into the corporate world for a short period of time, realized that probably wasn't my calling in life. So found other ways back into law enforcement. Altogether, I spent 14 years in full-time capacity in law enforcement, and then a few years as a reserve as well. And then I also spent some time in the military as a battlefield airman. I went over in the security forces realm and then went into the fast teams and deployed in support of different conflicts throughout the country and spent some time in the Middle East and Europe and other places. Along with that, I kind of got hammered, I guess, years ago by learning breaching. And so I started chasing rabbits all over the world. And I was very fortunate to work under some of the biggest names in the breaching community, Pete Cornell and the Cherries and others. And if you know anything about that community, these are the living legends. And so because of their mentorship and tutelage, I worked for a private company for over 14 years and did that for a number of years. And then finally, this kind of all culminated in 2021. So I decided that I wanted to start my own training company, but differently than some others. I didn't want to do it with me being the center of attention. There's a lot of awesome guys that have much more experience than me, and I don't try to compete with that. But what I do really well is build great teams around me. And that is the reason that the Guild has been called the Guild. And so in 21, we established it. 22, we started running courses. As most companies, and you would expect, Tanner, it's always a slow go. It's like a trickle effect. And then somewhere around 23, we started kind of finding our stride. Took off in 24. Last year, we did 32 courses, 446 students. We have, the hopes of doing over 40 courses in 26 with 650 students, now branching to the international markets as well. And then the last little piece of my career, which is super crazy and weird, I worked for Avon Protection and then Team Wendy as the product specialist manager. And now I am the director of training for Prime Infill. And so kind of a weird career, but it's worked out well for me, and I'm very blessed and fortunate to have some great people in my life that's kind of helped me navigate this crazy direction of life, if you will. So that's the nutshell. And if they want to know specifics, certainly they can go to the website and read all about it. We try to pride ourselves on transparency.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. When you look back at your career, what ties law enforcement, military, and training together for you? How did those all just come into contact? Because I know plenty of law enforcement and I know plenty of military, but not all of those guys are going to go out and train people,
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so one of the things too is we don't really believe at the Guild that we are trainers. And I know this sounds silly and some people are going to say semantics. We truly call ourselves facilitators for development or facilitators for learning. I can train a dog, I can train a cat, I can train animals, but humans need development. Training is regurgitation. So I said all that to say that years ago, I started working in the education with a private school many, many years ago. I've publicly spoke in front of 2 people to several thousand individuals. So altogether over 20 plus years in this community, either doing it or teaching it in some capacity. And so I've always had a heartbeat for truly developing human beings. And how that became a breaching thing is, man, there's a lot of dudes that are really incredible when it comes to CQB or movement, as we call it. They're awesome when it comes to shooters. And I tried to be good at those things, and I wasn't bad. I was proficient, and I would like to think that I was one of the better guys on the Metro Memphis team that I worked at. But that just didn't call to me, man. I felt like there was this really unique problem that was not being deeply addressed, and that's the breaching community, because ultimately that's what breaching is, right? It's high, complex problem solving and being a component of that team. So from that, my background in education, and then going into my love for breaching and truly driving into just madness, trying to learn everything from types of doors and types of targets. And it's much more than just building a charge and things like that. Just kind of took me on this journey. And then those things kind of came together. And then ultimately, man, I love seeing the light bulbs click in people. There's not many things in my life that gives me greater fulfillment. It's not an ego stroke for me. It's not, hey, I'm your instructor, I'm better than you. I just don't play those nonsense games. Ultimately, it's only what we do on a daily basis that truly matters. It's not what you did 20 years ago. That's awesome, man. Kudos to you. Here's your hand clap, right? But what did you do today? And so that was what I wanted to create. And my education piece came together with the breaching piece. And then all of a sudden, this thing just kind of exploded. And we've met some incredible people like yourself and others that have helped us get the word out and kind of show what the Guild has to offer, which I believe is different than many more of the competitors out there. So yeah, that's the long answer.
Awesome. Was there an early moment where you realized your path was going to be bigger than just a job?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've always, been inclined to push and go places that, others don't. Let's just face it, man, there are some badass dudes out there in our community. Incredible. But they didn't, or they don't necessarily convey that through communication. They're great at doing, not necessarily at teaching. And I believe those are completely separate skill sets. I think they should go together, but ultimately you have to be able to do, but that doesn't make you a great communicator or developer. And you being a great developer without experience also is problematic. And so I felt like we as the Guild, and I'm going to reference we a lot because it's truly built around that, not me. We were able to build this pretty incredible team, from special mission units to full-time SWAT guys that were in some of the highest crime areas in the country. The list goes on, from TBTs to, 0311s in the Marine Corps and so on. And so for me, I kind of became the central figure or catalyst of establishing all these relationships. And that is a superpower of itself. It's not necessarily all about me or everything I've done, but it's what the team brings to the table. And that's what really motivates me to say, hey, man, we can do something special here because of what the sum of us bring versus just a small group of us bring.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You said you stepped away into the corporate world and then came back. What did leaving and returning teach you about leadership and culture?
Oh, man. I hope we got 4 hours on this one here. So, well, one of the things that we have to all realize is that I think some of the greatest lessons we can learn is not from what goes right, but from what goes wrong. And in the corporate world, I certainly learned that a lot of it is money motivated. I never wanted that to be what we were about. That was a great lesson I learned. You got to make money to make a business. But it's very, very easy to tell who is in this for the money, for the fame. Just listen to them. Give them enough time to talk and just listen. And so those were lessons I learned, working for a Fortune 500 company. And so when I came back into the law enforcement realm, to me, it was the community that I missed. It was the brotherhood that I missed. And still to this day, miss those things. As our director of training says all the time, man, you don't miss the circus, but you sure do miss the clowns. And that is a lot of what law enforcement brought. But what I figured out is, hey, if we could take the lessons learned from the corporate area and run it professionally and then apply that as a community-based training organization, That's something pretty special that a lot of people can't do. And so it was all of these lessons learned of how to, use a RACI report, to have legitimate curriculum, not, hey, bros, listen to me. Here we go. I got this. And so those were things that I learned that helped me develop and design curriculum, to get things approved, to get things accredited, to get things listed all the way out. A lot of people do some awesome training, but man, you ask them what the source of their curriculum is, and you'll hear crickets. And so those were things that I took from the corporate world, but not to lose that connectivity of, Tanner and Shane just hanging out, having a beer together type stuff. And I think that's very important. The blending of the two environments is really probably what I took.
That's great. Was there a moment early on when you realized ego could get you or others hurt?
Oh, man. Dude, these are great questions, bro. These are campfire questions, right? We just need to light it up. Yeah, absolutely. And I've experienced that. I've had some leaders in my life. Obviously, we're going to be professionals and never throw out names, but they're driven by their ego. They're driven by what they accomplished. And again, it's all about that. And the problem with that is that really does affect everybody within their arm's reach. And, I had a team leader at one time, a phenomenal shooter, really a great human being to be around. But, he let his ego take control of him, and that was his demise. I've had bosses that I've worked for that, from the outside, people looking, they're like, oh, yeah, man, he's awesome. Well, what you do behind doors is also what you do in public, and it reflects in that. So, to me, our internal ethos became ego is the enemy of success. And again, you got all the nonsense on the gram and YouTube and stuff like that, but we really try to live that. I'm not a perfect man. I make mistakes. I argue with my wife, and I get mad at my kids, and I don't kick the dogs, but I want to kick the dogs. I'm just as human as everyone else, but I am on a journey to become a better human being. And I think having that premise that ego must always be in check, no matter what you've done, no matter how cool the operations are, no matter who you hang out with, the shoulders that you rub, if you don't check yourself somewhere, someplace, and sometime, you're going to get checked. Maybe at the end of your career, middle part, or the beginning. But ultimately, that just impedes development, and we can't allow that. And so why guys that are on a tier 1 level have joined forces with our team and believe in my leadership, I don't know. Still trying to figure that out too. But I will tell you that I think a lot of it has to do with they know that I have their best interest at heart, and that I'll do everything in my power not to burn them. And I think that should reflect into our students when they come too. Man, I can embarrass you. You want to talk about crystalline lattice theories and vortices, and you want to talk about propagation waves and, inflections and all this. Yeah, we can do that. And I can show you how smart I am. But ultimately, that does nothing but prove that I have a massive ego if you're not learning from the education that I've put into myself.
That's awesome. That sounds great to work with you, dude.
Well, thanks, buddy. When I get enough money, I'll hire you.
Yeah. You've worked SWAT, fast security operations overseas. How did operating in different environments change how you assess risk?
I think probably the fact that I worked a Metro Memphis agency had a lot to do with a lot of that. I mean, there's certainly places I went overseas that are semi-permissible and non-permissible environments that I would say is comparable to certain areas of Memphis.
Yeah.
Legitimate. And of course, it wasn't always that bad, and it's gotten worse through the years. But I think that all of that blends together. And to make my point, one of the things that we've seen is you get a lot of guys that come out from Naval Special Warfare. Awesome guys, man. I have some great friends in that community. Same thing with the Green Beret community. Same thing with Delta, Dev, MARSOC, cops. It's all the same. Well, they come out and they kind of have this mindset of what NSW operates in, or their AOR. Same thing for all of them. And so we try to kind of force round pegs into square holes, meaning everybody needs to learn from me because I'm the tip of the spear where I was. And for us at the Guild, we didn't want that to be. That's the whole essence of what a Guild is, right? It's a community base. If you looked up historically speaking, you had people that were leathermen, farmers, warriors. They came together. They created this kind of capitalist society. And that's essentially what it is. Everyone has their own little kingdom that works within the kingdom. And so how the security thing ultimately affected me and how working overseas affects me is you realize that there are apples and there are oranges. They're both fruit, right? So they both taste sweet, but there's a very clear difference in the two. There are rules of engagement that are quite different over there. There are things that are applicable. So I learned by going overseas basically how to decipher between what makes sense in a CONUS environment or continental U.S. and those that doesn't make sense. And it's the way that we do tactics. Even though I don't teach the CQB in the movement or shooting, that's not my niche. I have my thing with breaching and leadership, and that's what I teach and I focus on, instructional development. But ultimately, it helped me to come back here, build this team to realize, man, that there's great things that we can apply that you would learn in Afghanistan. There's things that you could apply in Iraq and Syria and these other places. But then sometimes it just does not make sense to try to force, again, that round peg into that square hole.
Yeah.
Fundamentals, hard skills, those things overlap. But getting into, some of the soft skills and how we communicate and what we do often changes how we do what we do.
After working in more than a dozen countries, what do Americans tend to underestimate about real-world security?
That it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a blessed nation. And again, like I said, man, there's people that have a ton more experience overseas than I do, and to keep it, completely grounded. But with the things that I have learned and doing security operations, inside of air bases and outside of air bases and, doing stuff legitimately in a sand pit in the middle of nowhere and going back and forth, what we realize is that layers are so important. And what the United States of America does very well, whether we understand it or not, is we provide lots of layers. I'm not going to get political, but that's the whole argument of Greenland right now. That's the argument of Iceland. That's why the diplomacy matters throughout different places, because these ultimately create geographical layers. And then once you come to the United States, there's all these other layers. One of the most sophisticated radar systems in all of the world is not far from me over at Palm Beach, Florida area. It is where a very specific unit constantly tries to infiltrate that because we understand layers. You say, well, how does this have anything to do with what you're doing with breaching? Well, ultimately, breaching is just peeling back layers and defeating those in a very micro-scaled layer. Whether we're doing hard target defeat, whether we're doing energetic breaching, or whatever the case is, ultimately it comes back to understanding layered security, whether we're doing security for someone or we're dismantling the security that maybe a crackhead or somebody who's got a warrant on their body is out there. So that's kind of what it's done for me. It just allows me to understand, security, and it allows me to understand cohesion and teamwork. And basically another thing that I'll say is throttle control. In fast operations, there's a lot of hang on, do nothing. Okay, teams are rolling up, whether that's, GBs or somebody else. Now we've got 2 minutes of an operation. And my part at the end or beginning of that operation is very vital. I didn't necessarily go out and grab the high-value target, but I enabled those guys to come back and safely get that high-value target back to a safe area. So teamwork is important. Layers of security is important. And I think ultimately, taking and picking from things and places and cultures all over make us what we are today. We are a sum of all of our environments.
Yeah. So moving from operator to instructor is sort of I say instructor, teacher, more like, is sort of a tough shift. What was harder than you expected it would be?
I don't think for me it was a major issue as far as the transitional space, just because of the fact that I've always in some capacity been involved in teaching, even from a young age. I mean, I was, co-captain of a basketball team. I've, done all these different endeavors out there. I've kind of always, I guess, had the responsibility, different capacities, not always law enforcement, military. But so for me, the teaching part wasn't a major issue. I think to me, it was transitioning from just the knowledge in my brain to ultimately conveying that in a palatable manner that people could understand. So one of the things that is a misconception with breaching specifically is well, if I teach you how to build a quote unquote, we call it delivery hose, but fire hose charge or duct tape linear, that makes me a breacher. Well, sorry to bust your bubble, but it really does not make you a breacher. That makes you a charge slapper. And so I wanted to kind of disprove a lot of those old theories where you go out and you just teach somebody, hey, I'm your instructor. Let me show you how to do it. Well, what I've done is I've caused you to regurgitate information. And one of the things that I'm a huge fan of and a proponent of is concepts over absolutes. I think that's so important. If you teach people absolutes, you're not empowering them. You're not making them thinkers. Ultimately, what you're doing is you're just giving them a skill set that you learned probably at a very shallow layer, 3 miles wide and 3 inches deep, and you're not giving them the context to truly be able to make the decision. Maybe I don't need a duct tape linear. Maybe I need to do a water impulse. Maybe I need a direct shock coupling and indirect shock coupling. And so those are the things that I think is so important. And that was probably my biggest struggle of over, say, the last 15 years is to transition that to make it something that somebody like Tanner could come to a course with no experience in energetics, no experience with breaching, and leave not just with a certificate saying, hey, look at me, I got the t-shirt. My name is Tanner. That's awesome. But we should probably also work on making sure that you truly understand the materials, that Tanner can apply those materials in training and in an operational capacity. And then lastly, can you articulate why you did what you did when you did it? And those are very important factors. You're standing in front of the court of law. You can't just stand up and say, well, hey, man, SEAL Team 6 taught me this. Cool. Where's SEAL Team 6 at? Are they testifying on your behalf? Like, there's this little thing called law, policy, and ethics in the Constitution that we got to abide by, and things are different. Go back to apples and oranges. They're both sweet and they're both fruit. But, homie, they're different. And you have to be able to articulate those things in a very professional, profound manner that makes it simplistic for people to understand.
Yeah. Well, you answered my next question. It would be what mistakes you made early on as a teacher that helped reshape how you teach today? And you sort of went into that. I really, really like that, because the whole thing is, I mean, if you're just there being taught something and you're just going through the motions and not really understanding why or how you're doing it, you're not learning anything. You're just
That's right.
there. So, being a teacher and an instructor and getting the students to realize what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it is so important. So I'm glad you teach that way.
Yeah, and you got to have KPIs. We call them key performance indicators. That's a very corporate term, but ultimately that is throughout the journey of that course or that program, you have sections, problems, issues, time constraints, et cetera, that determine, are they learning according to the path that you've set ahead? And if you find someone's that's not learning, then you have two options. Do we go back and make everybody slow down? How do we get them? That's its own conversation piece. So I think KPIs are so important that a lot of instructors don't incorporate into their course. Why? Because it hurts the instructor's ego. If they're not getting it, it's easy to say, hey, dumbass, get your shit right, excuse my French, and get it right. But the fact is, it may not be them. It might be you. And that's something you have to take an introspective look into yourself and identify those things.
You built Guild around the idea that ego is the enemy of success. Where did that philosophy really come from?
I've worked with egomaniacs.
Yeah.
That's it, man. There's no super profound. I've worked for different individuals, and if anyone listens to this thing, it's probably not geared towards, or maybe if you think it is, but I would say it's really, as a whole, I've worked with some people in this community. My God, everybody's special. Everybody does something awesome. I have 2 or 3 friends that are very good friends of mine that come from, the D word, they wouldn't even say it out there, but a special missions unit. And I have these conversations with them. Man, those guys have done more than I'll ever do. They're incredible human beings. They're absolute badasses. But the reason that I call them my friends is because they're not maniac dickheads. And there are so many out there. And it truly does not matter what you did yesterday. It matters what you're doing today. And then ultimately, what are you doing for your community tomorrow? Everybody has this inflated self-perception. And so I've seen that destroys companies. If you look at the average training company, I don't know where this statistic came from, but I heard it. It's around 8 years, and that holds very true. You go back and take Tanner's, census of companies 7, 8, 9, 10 years and they fall. 7, 8, 9, 10 years and they fall. And there's one central factor that comes to all of that, and it really is ego. If he gets caught up with a bunch of different women, it's probably because he thinks he's got a massive ego and he's a good-looking dude. If he's getting caught up in legal problems, it's probably because he's got a massive ego and thinks he's above the law. If he gets into a domestic violence issue, it all goes back to ego. And I didn't want to build a company based off of just me or Jabo, our director of training, who's a human that is, he's off the charts. He's a great human being, but it's bigger than that. The mission's bigger than that. If something was to happen to me or him, I wanted the mission of the Guild to continue. And so it had to be the very foundation. And I'll say this in being done with that. I got it from a lady named Vesta Mangan. I always give credit. She passed away many years ago, but she said, you cannot build a mansion on a dollhouse foundation. You got to have a deep, wide, solid foundation in order to sustain life in this community, because this community will eat its own and everybody outside will eat you too. And so for us, man, we just wanted to promote the word community. We're not going to get it perfect. We're going to have haters out there. That's just a part of it, man. You got to have big enough shoulders to deal with that. But ultimately, that was why ego is the enemy of success.
Okay. How do you adjust teaching when someone doesn't really have a professional background but still wants to be capable and responsible? Have you dealt with newer guys like that?
Yeah. Are we talking about strictly law enforcement or on the civilian side? Just for
It can be either or.
Yeah, so we don't do a lot of civilian training. I've worked with a lot of civilians. That's more of an insurance reason. It's kind of tough to get someone to already, there's only a few insurance agencies that will even insure you for doing energetics.
Yeah.
And you piss them off, you get down to really slim pickings very quick. So we do work with, obviously for professional discretionary reasons, we do work with a couple corporate companies behind the scenes and helping their security. So we do believe in that. I 100% believe in the First and the Second Amendment. Make sure that's very clear so the haters don't come out and throw rocks. But from the Guild standpoint, we pretty much strictly train law enforcement, military, or government organizations unless there's a need to know or we sign some certain paperwork, keeping us from being liable. But with that, how do we go back and develop some of these individuals as a whole, and I really think that there has to be a clear path when you start every course. I think everything from the beginning of a program, let me break this down for you. When Tanner shows up in a course, you've probably within 2 minutes already made a determination on what we're about. You've probably seen us on Instagram. You've seen some cool stuff. We blew something up and he's like, it's going to be a fun time. But if you get there and your entire experience from the moment you walk in that door is not professional to the time you leave, we have now basically put a bad taste in your mouth. So that's something that I push and perpetuate. I live it. I make my guys live it. You come in, man, we are absolutely from start to finish. We want to make sure that it's an experience of learning. It's an experience of development. Because remember, you're coming to a course and you get a certificate that says, hey, Tanner, you're certified in explosive breaching, right, bro? That's a journey, man. You're not a master breacher. And you can go to a 13-day course. I know I'm going to get some hate over this, but just because you went to a 13-day course in the military or 18-day course in the military, it says you're a master breacher. You are on paper. That don't mean you are in real life. It is a journey. I could throw out some names, but, there's some GMs out there that were former Delta guys, and they'll tell you they've learned a lot more about shooting outside of Delta Force than they did in inside the unit because it's a journey and breaching is the exact same way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was the rabbit. That was the rabbit trail went down.
What skills matter more than gear for people just getting started?
Attitude.
Yeah.
I know it's a soft skill. I think attitude is so important. I think hard skills, I think physical fitness is a major thing. I've had a journey myself. There's times I've been incredibly fit and, could run a 40-minute 5 mile and do 80 push-ups in a minute and all that nonsense. And there's been times where, man, I got fluffy and I let myself go and I had too much, liquor and bourbon and all the things that we love to do because it makes us feel good. But I think fitness is so important. If you cannot run, and I'm not saying everybody has to be a triathlete. I'm not saying everyone has to be able to pump out 150 push-ups in 2 minutes. But if you don't have a level of fitness pertaining to what you're doing, you're wrong, 100%. And I would also say that law enforcement needs to train to be athletes, not bodybuilders, Man, my kids are into BJJ. I think that's awesome. I can't wait to get back up to where we're traveling to start rolling on the mats and things like that. And that's awesome. Those are great skills. But ultimately, we need to be athletes. So I think that's a part of it. I think the next thing is a good attitude, an attitude that when you're the new guy, there's a lot of sometimes trying to think of the correct terminology, but sub-ego that comes out, overcompensation, where they know they don't have the skills that they thought they did based off 4 years in the military or whatever. And so they try to overcompensate for what they lack in the hard skills. And so the attitude becomes very negative. I think that's a problem. And then I think the third thing, man, is hunger. You have to be hungry for the journey. When I wanted to become a law enforcement professional, instructor as far as shooting is concerned, which really doesn't hold a lot of water, we all know that. But when I wanted to be a quote unquote red shirt or instructor, one of the things I had to realize is that I wasn't that good. And so I had to get into this hunger to basically take what little bit of money I had. And if you guys knew anything about, the Southeast, there ain't much money, especially in Mississippi, Tennessee, 15, 16 years ago, especially. And so I took out, and my wife can tell you, she's listening in, I took out $50 almost every single check. And I went down, I bought my cheapest freaking Russian ammo I could. And I went out back and I slung rounds. Nobody paid me for that. I did that. And so that's the hunger that I think you have to have. I don't care if it's CQB movement, CQC, breaching, whatever. But fitness, a good attitude, and being hungry to go down that trail are three things that you have to have way more than gear. I have a guy that I look up to named John N. I'll just say that. He was a former 7th Group guy, and he says this. He says, equipment never makes the operator, but it should support him or her at their best. And so any equipment out there, if you do your part, should allow you to function at your absolute best, whether that's a helmet, a PC, a holster, or a gun or whatever. And if it lets you do that, you bring the other three things, you're probably going to be all right.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I was talking to my wife earlier and told her who we were having on the podcast and what you did. And she asked, can he tell us how to make sure our door doesn't get breached? And I said, not that we were doing anything that needs our doors to be breached, but I told her, well, I mean, he's a professional in the space, and it's sort of like, in order to be a good cop, you have to know how illegal things go down and how they're done, right? So my question to you is that something that you have to do as well? Is that something you have to think of and think about and know what people are doing behind their locked and closed doors and what they're doing to make sure that they aren't being breached? Is that something that you have to know about? Because it's going to determine what tools you bring, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And these are all great conversations that really deserve a second, third, and fourth conversation. I don't know if this is a bad time to talk about that white powdery substance back behind you right now, but just totally kidding. So to your wife's question, it is important. Personal security is important. We want to support law-abiding citizens. We don't want anything tyrannical. We believe in that in the Guild, man. I think that that's very important. One of the things to go back to this specific question is you have to understand construction. So for a very short period of time, I worked for a company out of Noblesville, Indiana, and I did stick framing and basically prefabbed houses. It was one of the greatest opportunities for me to learn about breaching in that right there. And this is one of the things that gets misunderstood. Just because you know a lot of charges, you can do an MSD calculator and you can do all that stuff, that's fine. But if you don't understand construction, the weak points, the strong points, if you don't know all that, you will never go to the next level in breaching. Do you know the difference in a king stud? Do you know what a cripple is? Do you know what a butt hinge is? Do you know what a piano hinge is? Do you know what a residential door, a holocore door? What's the makeup? What's the PSI? My God, we could go down an entire freaking list, Tanner, if you wanted to. So I think that is the foundational elements, if you will. That's the soft skill of breaching, where the hard skill is building the charge, placing the charge, working the weapon, integrating within the team. You can't have hard skills and not soft skills and vice versa. Those things go together. And this is where we as the community, we get out of whack sometimes, man. We're out of balance. We focus so much on the gear, so much on just the skill, but it really is a balance of all these things. So I think it's important that you understand how things are constructed. You understand, the area of operation. There in Metro Memphis, one of the problems that we run into is everything has a grilled security on it. Grilled security door, grilled security window. So that was a major problem. Well, as you start training across the entire country, guess what we learn? That's not always a problem over in Indiana. But what we learned down in South Florida is everything is impact glass. Everything is hurricane reinforced. If I go up to Rochester, New York, you can't use the Bearcat to knock in the door like everybody, take the Rook and take the Bearcat. Like, dudes, come on, man. It shows that you're a novice because truthfully, they have to go up a stoop. You cannot use that. So they have to use more energetics. They deal with a lot more barricades up there than we did down there. So all of these skill sets, I think, come together where learning the area of operation of where you are, learning the foundation of construction, learning the weak points, blast pressure travels the path of least resistance per se. And so if you understand that, here's where it all makes sense. If I know, I can't remember his name, the famous author, The Art of War, whatever it is, but he said to defeat your enemy, you must know it. Well, from a breacher standpoint, construction is the enemy. And so if I want to reduce liability, just me taking the right charge and deflecting the pressure into the frame is the difference in me hurting or killing your child on the other side. Just because mom and dad is a shithead don't mean that kid did anything wrong. So I have to do everything within my power to be responsible for every grain, for every charge, for every bit of target spallation or fragmentation that's coming off that. And if you don't know construction, if you don't know all the ins and outs, then ultimately you're not going to be a true professional. And that is the things that I think that separates the Guild is we go into great, great depth of breaking that down. If you just want me to teach you a charge, dude, save your money, I'll do that over the internet. But if you want to be a breacher, come hang out with us and get your brain swelled a little bit.
It's fascinating how much you went through there. And obviously I know nothing about it, so it's great. And the fact that you went through construction and knowing every single bit about it, you don't think about it beforehand, but you mention it now. And I'm like, dude, it seems like that should be a prerequisite before you even start breaching is knowing all the ins and outs of construction. Cause that sounds like everything that you learn there is just going to help you and turn you into a better professional.
You're exactly right.
Great.
We tell all of our students that, hey, if you have never gone out and done Habitat for Humanity or something like that, go out and donate some of your time. When you come to our course, if there's a brand new neighborhood being developed, go walk around that neighborhood. Start taking up some videos, taking drawings, schematics. There's all kinds of different stuff out there for us to gain an education. And that's the misunderstanding when it comes to accessing a structure, as we call it. It's not just breaching, it's accessing a structure. Because sometimes I need to blow the hell out of the door. And sometimes I can use a bypass method and not do that. If it's Mamaw's house, it's probably a cool idea if I don't make Mamaw have to pay $1,500 when she's on a fixed income. I bet she would appreciate that, you know? So those are things that when I think of a full, well-rounded, competent breacher, we probably should know a little bit about.
Yeah. What excites you most about where Guild is headed next?
What I don't know.
Yeah.
And I couldn't answer that any more perfect. I've really tried in my life, at least the last year, to embrace the journey of life. I didn't know if the Guild would even go. Most businesses don't. And honestly, people that have known me, they probably would have bet against me too, you know, and then all of a sudden it just started expanding. And I want to stop and say, we truly are a product of amazing people around us. And I cannot give, if I even started doing the name thing right now, it would be here. I'd be here all night. I mean, people like Rick with ORD and others out there that have done so much to help get the word out. So I think the fact that I don't know where the future is and that we seem to be on a trajectory that is positive to the community. We've got some major things coming up. We're doing scholarships. We're giving out 4 scholarships this year. We're giving free classes. We're helping with food vouchers. We've got people that have stood up and said, hey, man, I'll pay for their hotel if they get there, just because they see the need to professionally train law enforcement. It's a shame that it takes a lot more hours to be a beautician or hairstylist than it does to carry a gun and a badge and take someone's life and freedom away. And I think the U.S. as a whole says, hey, man, we've got to step up and get these guys, not just training, not just a cool guy MVG and shooting classes. Those are important, but you're going to do a lot more breaching in your career than in gunfights. So we probably should put the time and effort into those things as well. And then, man, just connecting with more people in the community. It's such an awesome thing to see what's being built around. I think that's what excites me the absolute most. We're going to grow. We're going to train thousands of people all over the world. We've got new projects coming on. We've got some new divisions of the company coming on. But I think when it's said and done and all the dust settles, I've always said this, Tanner, my dream is when I'm an old man, if God blesses me with those years, is to have a big old house, wraparound porch, or big bonfire, and have 30, 40, 50 of my buddies sitting around. And we don't have to say anything. All we have to do is just look at each other. We know the journey that we did together. We kept it together. We didn't break apart, and we stayed the course. We fought the good fight. And I think that is the most amazing thought at the end of your journey.
What a perfect way to end the podcast. Shane, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciated all of the knowledge that you gave me and the listeners for free. It's incredible to see what you're doing, and I'm especially excited to see where you guys go. And for the listeners out there, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Beer 30. As always, keep an eye out for the next one wherever you listen.
So there you have it. This concludes another episode of UF Pro's Beer 30 podcast. Want more information about UF Pro and tactical clothing for professional end users? Then please visit ufpro.com or follow our channels on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.